My daughter looked me straight in the eye at the lawyer's office and demanded Mom hand over the $50 million. Now it belongs to us. My heart clenched, but I kept my face calm, the weight of all my years teaching me not to break. Instead of giving in, I quietly began gathering proof, determined to protect what my husband and I built. And believe me, that shocking demand was only the beginning of a storm no one expected. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, letting me know where you're watching from. The chapel smelled of lilies and polished wood, their sweetness mingling with the heaviness of sorrow. I sat in the front pew, my black gloves folded tightly in my lap. My husband Harlan lay in a coffin only a few feet away, and yet it felt like he was already miles beyond my reach. For 45 years, he had been the steady beat of my life, quiet but constant. Now the silence around me was deafening. The minister spoke of faith and eternity, but all I heard was the hollow echo of my own breathing. The room was full neighbors, old colleagues, family, but I had never felt so alone. And beneath the veil of mourning, I sensed something else moving in the air, something colder than grief. When I lifted my eyes, they landed on my daughter Isolde. She stood stiff by the doorway, dressed in black silk that seemed more like armor than a garment of loss. Our gazes met for only a second, but the chill of it pierced deeper than the autumn draft seeping in through the doors. She did not cry, not even a flicker of wetness in her eyes. Instead, she measured the room, her glance lingering on the casket, as though it were not her father's resting place, but a locked chest waiting to be opened. I wanted to believe it was just shock, the way grief can freeze a person, but the thought would not settle. I stayed silent, steadying my hands, as if that might steady the doubt rising in my chest. As mourners lined up to whisper condolences, I caught words that were not meant for my ears. She'll be sitting on a fortune now. Another voice, lower but sharp. 50 million, wasn't it? Imagine the house she'll keep for herself. Their whispers sliced through me more cruelly than the sight of the coffin. My sorrow curdled into something rawer humiliation. I pressed a polite smile onto my lips, nodding at one cousin after another, while inside I burned with shame and anger. Did they think my tears were a performance for wealth? That the decades of marriage, of holding Harlan's hand through every illness and every joy, meant nothing compared to a dollar sign? I clenched my gloves tighter, choosing silence over protest because I knew no defense would soften their envy. That evening, the house felt too large, too quiet. I placed Harlan's framed photograph on the kitchen table as if it might keep me company. His eyes, even captured in stillness, carried the calm I had leaned on all my adult life. He was a man of few words, careful with money, cautious with plans. We never discussed his accounts in detail. He handled them with the same reserve he lived his life. Now, as I sat in the empty kitchen, the weight of that secrecy pressed down on me. I wondered what lay hidden in his papers, what promises or protections he had left. And in the hollowness of the rooms, one image kept returning, Isolde's calculating stare at the funeral so different from a daughter's grief. The phone rang sharp and sudden, breaking the stillness. I reached for it with a hesitant hand, already knowing the name that would appear on the screen. Isolde's voice came through, clipped and impatient. "We need to meet about the will," she said, skipping past any pretense of comfort. Her tone held no softness, no daughterly care, only demand. My chest tightened. The day of mourning had not even closed, and already the storm was rising. I murmured a steady response, hiding the anger that licked at the edges of my sorrow. When the call ended, I sat back in the chair, staring at Harlan's photo. The peace of grief had been fractured, and I knew the days ahead would test me more than widowhood ever could. The phone rang again, its sharp tone cutting through my quiet kitchen like a blade. I didn't need to check the screen. I already knew. Isolde's voice came through, clipped and impatient. "We need to meet, today, about the will." There was no softness, no pause for courtesy. My grief was still raw, but to her it seemed irrelevant. I pressed the receiver closer to my ear, weighing silence against words, but I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. "Fine," I said quietly. "We'll meet." The line went dead, without even a thank you. I sat still for a long while, staring at the framed photo of Harland on the counter before I gathered my purse and keys. Downtown Austin felt louder than usual, cars crowding Congress Avenue and pedestrians weaving past the stone buildings. I stepped into Raymond Hale's office, a place lined with dark wood panels and shelves of books that smelled faintly of dust and history. Raymond had been our family lawyer for decades, a man Harland trusted when he trusted almost no one. He rose to greet me with a solemn nod, his graying beard adding weight to his calm presence. "Claudine," he said, his voice steady. "I'm sorry for your loss again." Before I could reply, Isolde swept into the room, her heels clicking against the floor, as if to announce that patience was not her virtue. She didn't sit until Raymond motioned us both to the chairs before his desk. He opened a folder, slowly adjusting his glasses. "Harland's will is clear. All assets, properties, and accounts transfer directly to you, Claudine. There is, however, a clause. For 1 year, no major transfers or sales can be made without prior approval." He looked up at me with something close to reassurance. Harland had thought ahead, protecting me even in death. Relief stirred in my chest, a fragile shield, but the sound of Isolde's exhale was sharp enough to cut through it. So everything just sits, while she does what live in comfort while the rest of us wait. Her voice was cold, almost mocking. Raymond's expression didn't shift. "The clause is binding." I felt Harland's foresight wrap around me, a last embrace of caution. Outside the office, the autumn sun glared off the glass buildings. I walked slowly, hoping Isolde would head her own way, but she caught my arm. Her grip was firm, her voice harder. "You need to do the right thing, Mother. 50 million doesn't belong to one person, not at your age. Think about the future, about responsibility. You can't possibly manage all that." Her words pressed down, each one a stone laid at my feet. I wanted to shout to remind her that I had carried this family long before she was born, that I had managed more than she could imagine. But instead, I stood silent. I let her speak, let her harshness reveal itself, like a crack spreading through glass. The silence between us grew heavier than her accusations. The drive home stretched long, every stoplight holding me in its red glow. I kept my hand steady on the wheel, though my thoughts were far from calm. Harland had been cautious for a reason, and now I saw why. This battle was not going to be about numbers on paper. It was going to be about my dignity, my survival, and my right to exist without being erased by the very child I had raised. The oak trees lining the road blurred as determination grew inside me. Quietly, I resolved that if my daughter wanted a fight, she would find me prepared, even if I never raised my voice. At home, the silence returned, but it was no longer the same as the night after the funeral. I sat in the living room surrounded by family photos, birthdays, graduations, vacations by the lake. Each frame held a piece of myself, given over the years, sacrifices made without regret. And now the same child whose smile lit those pictures had turned greed into her compass. My chest ached, but not from grief alone. It was the ache of betrayal. I touched the edge of one photo, the image of Isolde as a young girl clutching my hand, and I whispered to the empty room, "I will not surrender." It wasn't anger that filled me, but resolve, a vow as soft as breath, yet stronger than any promise I had spoken before. I knew this was only the beginning. They did not ring the bell. The knock came sharp and quick, as if the door belonged to them. When I opened it, Isolde walked in before I could speak, her husband Gregory, close behind with a leather folder tucked to his chest. A family meeting, she announced, laying her coat across the sofa as though claiming a right. Late light fell across the hardwood. It was the kind that makes dust sparkle and motives show. I had brewed coffee out of habit, not hospitality. They didn't ask. They sat. I stood a moment longer, feeling the small insult of that posture. My home carried Harland everywhere. The framed diploma by the bookcase, the neat mantle steadying me. "You could have called," I said. "We did," Isolde replied, voice tidy. "You let it go to voicemail." She folded her hands. Gregory turned the folder so the clasp faced me. The word meeting hovered between us like a permit. I chose my chair and silence instead. Isolde began with concern the way doctors ease into bad news. "Mom, you're alone here," she said, surveying the windows as though weakness hid in a draft. "Evan worries about you. Maybe a medical alert bracelet," Gregory nodded, voice solemn. "Houses like this attract attention. Same lights, same routines. People notice. And at your age, one bad step can undo a whole summer." I felt the shape of the argument more than the words. Concern, then suggestion, then decision, stacked like stairs that lead only one way. "I have neighbors," I said. "I have locks. I know this house the way you know your phone." I smiled just enough. "And the stairs know me." Isolde crossed a leg ankle poised. "We are trying to help," she said. "No one wants you to feel controlled." Then the sentence that revealed the plan. "We need to be realistic about how much responsibility you can carry." The we made a small, clean cut. The coffee pot clicked off. Its silence sounded like a verdict. I kept my hands folded and did not answer. "When you don't take the bait, the water clears." Their eyes touched over the gap I left alone. Gregory opened the folder at last. A single page lay inside heavy paper light type. "We met a planner," he said. He explained the exposure that comes with a large estate. Taxes, scam calls, algorithmic trades. It's a different world now. He angled the page toward me. "A family management agreement keeps things safe. We can handle disbursements, bills, the accounts, and you give final approval. A modern solution." Isolde chimed in with gentle reason. "Dad did everything himself. He was careful, but the digital side," she waved a hand, "is complicated. Mom, I know you did bookkeeping when I was little, but this is different. The dashboards alone would make you crazy." I watched the page. It did not change. "I'm managing," I said. Gregory's smile was sympathetic in the way of men who believe they are being kind while taking the wheel. "It's not about ability," he said. "It's about risk. You can live comfortably on a fraction. We'll make the assets work. Why carry the weight when we can shoulder it for you weight?" Work. Shoulder. A generous vocabulary for a takeover. Raymond reviewed the will with me, I said. Harland was specific. A muscle tightened in Gregory's jaw. Isolde's polite tone cooled. "We're talking about what's right, not what's written," she said. "Family takes care of family. And I am family," I answered. Something broke. Gregory leaned forward, voice clipped. "Refusing help is reckless," he said. "Sitting on capital while we drown is cruel. You'll never spend it. You'll be gone before you use a tenth." The word struck with the flat of the blade. Isolde stood with him, chin lifted, handbag swinging like a flag. "Sign something," she said. "We need authority before a disaster proves us correct." I rose too. The floor felt steady. "No," I said, plain and whole. "You will leave my home now." Gregory laughed a single humorless sound. "Or what? Or we will not speak again until you remember how." I opened the front door. Late light spilled over the threshold. The open space looked like a choice. Chairs scraped. They stepped past me in a rush of expensive scent. Isolde did not look back. The door shut on the momentum of leaving. Silence rearranged the house after they were gone. It sat on the cushions and drifted down the hall, testing each room for cracks. My hands trembled, then steadied on a chair. Relief came first, cool and quick. Sorrow followed heavy. It's its own kind of mourning to turn your child away. I carried a mug I didn't drink and let the orbit calm me. Photos lined the corridor, Isolde in a paper crown, Harland with a fish that wasn't as big as he pretended, the three of us under a motel awning while rain hammered the lot. We had built a life from ordinary days. I was the keeper of that weather. In the living room, I sat where Isolde had sat and felt the warm dent fade. The agreement page lay on the table. I folded it and slid it into the drawer with warranties and spare keys, things you don't need daily but keep because history teaches you to prepare. I checked each lock, not from fear, but from habit, and stood at the back door with my palm on the cool metal. This would not end with a slammed door. Pressure reorganizes. If they cannot sway me with words, they may try something worse. The thought did not frighten me. It focused me. I turned out lights until only a lamp by Harlan's chair remained. I let it burn a little longer, then clicked it dark and let the house hold me unbroken. 2 mornings after I sent them out of my house, I stepped onto the porch and found my mailbox face down in the grass. The post had a clean crack. No paper again. I set the box on the steps, gathered the circulars, and stood a moment in the cool air. Little things I told myself. Wind, teenagers. Yet the timing told a different story. I swept the walk, checked the door camera, and brewed coffee. The video showed nothing but raccoons. Inside, I kept moving dishes, laundry, a morning that wanted to be normal. When the doorbell rang, I recognized the shadow on the glass before I turned the knob. "Just checking in," Isolde said brightly, stepping past me before I could invite her. She brought the scent of citrus and a bouquet wilting. Water she asked already at the sink opening cabinet she didn't need. I watched the way her eyes measured surfaces, handles, drawers, as if my kitchen were a test. She intended me to fail. Minutes later, she held my keyring up like a discovery from an archaeological dig. "Mom," she breathed, feigning relief. "You put your keys in the freezer. That isn't safe. What if you needed them in the night?" The metal tapped against her ring. I heard triumph in the sound. I could say what I knew, that I'd left those keys on the tray by the door that she'd asked for water so she could cross the room. Instead, I took them, slid them into my pocket, and let the moment sit between us. "It happens," I said lightly. Cold keys, hot summer. My smile was small and steady. She tilted her head the way people do when they rehearse sympathy. "I worry that's all she said." Little slips add up. I walked her back to the door with thanks for the flowers and watched her car idle at the curb long enough for a text. By noon, she called again. "I'm near Hensley's," she said. "Do you want me to pick up your prescription?" Her voice made help sound efficient and inevitable. "I'm already headed that way," I answered. "I'll manage." At the counter, the pharmacist handed over a white bag with my name and a dosage I didn't recognize. The label showed numbers 1 notch higher than my last refill. The doctor's scrawl on the printed note looked unusually neat. I stepped aside, opened the bag, and read every line twice. "Could you check the previous dosage?" I asked quietly. The tech tapped keys, frowned, and said the system showed the increase signed off yesterday by authorized family. "I don't have authorized family," I replied. "Please flag the file and note that I will confirm directly with the clinic." I photographed the label, the receipt, the timestamp, and slid the untouched bottle back into the bag. In the parking lot, I wrote a timeline and called the clinic to schedule a direct review. Late afternoon found me in Harlan's chair with a ledger pad. The phone rang with an unfamiliar number and a calm voice. "Mrs. Vega, this is Robert from First Capital's fraud desk. We have an attempted password reset on your online banking and a pending wire request from a new device. Did you authorize either action?" I glanced at the clock, then at the folder of statements under my hand. "No," I said. "Thank you for calling." "We've paused the transfer," he continued. "For your security, we'll need in-person verification at your branch. I can provide a case ID. I wrote it down, asked him to repeat it, and requested the time and IP location recorded for the attempt. He gave me a city 2 miles from Isolde's office. I did not say her name. "Please also note that no third party has authority on my accounts," I said, "and text me the report number." A chime arrived seconds later. When the house exhaled again, I spread my papers on the dining table. The knocked mailbox, missing papers, keys, and the freezer altered dosage the bank's call. I dated each incident and added small weather facts because juries believe the way air felt. I printed screenshots and tucked them into clear sleeves, then opened a fresh document with a simple heading, Log. The work was neat and slow and oddly calming, like shelling peas into a blue bowl. At dusk, an alert pinged from the county portal I'd used after Harlan died. A new entry flashed beside my name. I clicked and read the words twice: petition for emergency guardianship, hearing date pending. Applicant confidential per statute. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling until the plaster blurred. So this was the shape of their plan. A paper version of the morning's performance my life described in deficit, a story written in the margins of my days until a judge believed it. I brewed tea and left it to steep too long, the bag, a dark flag in the cup. Then I called Raymond and left a message with only facts. I set a small camera on the hallway shelf and another near the back door. The installer would come tomorrow, but tonight I wanted the comfort of a tiny red light. I put the keys on the tray by the door and photographed them there the way you photograph a sunrise, not to keep the light, but to prove you saw it. Before bed, I walked the rooms and made a list of what still belonged to me: the chair, the clock, the pink geranium that refused to quit the neighbor's porch light across the street, the sound of buses aligning the city. I pressed my palm to the cool of the front door and felt the house press back. They were betting on a version of me that doesn't exist, I thought. Let them. I would be here to answer. I locked the door. I woke to the ping of county email and the smell of coffee. The subject line was short and merciless: Emergency Petition Vega Claudine. I stood in my kitchen and clicked. The seal glared from the top of the PDF. The hearing was stamped, expedited. A chill pooled in my shoulders. They were asking a court to decide I could not steer my own life. I read twice before my hands would move. The petition framed itself as concern episodes of confusion, unsafe habits, financial vulnerability. Bullet points marched like little hammers. The mailbox incident, keys misplaced in a freezer, medication mismanagement, a suspicious attempt to move funds. Every rehearsed moment from the past week had been folded into a story that made me small. I felt heat rise and then flatten. Humiliation is hottest where love should have been. I poured coffee and began to annotate. Next to misplaced keys, I wrote photographed on entry table, 7:42 p.m. Next to medication error, I wrote pharmacy label, altered clinic verification pending. I reminded myself that judges read calmly when everyone else is loud. My job was to be boring and precise. Before 10, I drove to First Capital, the branch off South Lamar with old oak roots buckling the sidewalk. A guard nodded me in. In a side office, the fraud specialist, Mara, greeted me with a pad already open. Mrs. Vega, thank you for coming in. We've seen multiple password reset attempts from a device not registered to your profile, plus a wire initiation from a new trusted phone. We blocked them, but I want to tighten your perimeter. I presented my ID, then a neat stack of notes with dates and times. Mara printed, stapled, and slid the packet across the desk. We'll add a voice passphrase and branch-only transfer flag. I'll also record that no family members are authorized on any account. She paused. I'm sorry you're navigating this while grieving. I nodded once, the way you do when you can't afford to fall apart in a bank office. We changed credentials, added alerts, and set an in-person verification rule that would turn any future emergencies into paper. From the parking lot, I called the clinic and confirmed an afternoon slot to review my prescription file. The nurse sounded brisk and kind. She promised to pull the doctor's orders and the pharmacy transmission. By early afternoon, I was in the office of Elias Corbin, a lawyer Raymond trusted for elder matters. Elias wore a navy tie and a face made for bad news, told gently. I placed the guardianship notice, the bank packet, and my timeline on his table. He read with a pen that made soft ticks in the margins. This is a classic pattern, he said. Create a record of decline using staged mishaps, then rush an emergency petition before the target can organize. The court wants to protect people. Petitioners exploit that instinct. He looked up. We will respond quickly, thoroughly, and without fireworks. I'll file a motion to continue so we have time to gather records and a notice of opposition with sworn affidavits. I want the pharmacy to certify the label change trail the clinic to confirm there was no dose modification and the bank to attest to the blocked attempts. He tapped the petition. Will also request the petitioner's identity be unsealed for due process. I don't want a spectacle, I said. I want the truth to stand up by itself. That's the strategy, he replied. We'll be as dull as a ledger and twice as heavy. He slid me a list. Tonight, write a day-by-day log from the funeral forward. Times places the smallest detail. Save every wrapper and envelope. And please, no confrontations. Let their story keep writing itself while we collect ink. On my way out, he added, Claudine, you are not alone in this. Elder financial abuse often wears the mask of love. At home, the light was thin and forgiving. I set the kettle on and opened a fresh notebook, page 1. Funeral. I wrote in tidy lines who stood where, who said what time the hearse pulled away. I attached photos of the fallen mailbox, printed the screenshot of the county alert, and slid the pharmacy bag into a larger envelope without breaking the seal. I labeled everything with blue painter's tape like a museum preparing an exhibit. I read the petition again at my desk, but this time the sting lessened. The words were still sharp, but they no longer entered me. Paper only cuts when you let it. I placed the notice in a red folder marked Court and tucked it beside Harlan's will. He had chosen his words with care. I could choose mine. Okay, dusk settled over the street as I checked the windows. I locked each one, then locked it again. In the bedroom, I set my phone to chime for calendar reminders, Clinic Bank Elias. Then I stood in the doorway and regarded my small kingdom, the quilt folded on the trunk, the shoes lined beneath the chair, the framed photo of us under a live oak the year we thought we had forever. I will not be erased, I said to the quiet house. It was not a threat. It was a plan. I slid a pen into the notebook's spine and placed it on the nightstand where a judge could find it, where my own mind could return to it if anyone tried to tell me a different story. That night before sleep, I walked the hallway and paused at the front door. I felt for the deadbolt, counted to 3, and turned away. The battle might have started on paper, but paper was where I would win. I woke with the cottony head of half-slept hours and the stubborn thought that paper alone would not keep me safe. By mid-morning, I had a cardboard box on the kitchen table, a pocket screwdriver, and a line of tiny lenses that looked like black buttons. My hands shook, once then steadied. I measured corners marked studs and set mounts no bigger than a thumbprint. If they want to make me look weak, I told the quiet house, then these walls will remember for me. The drill's whisper stitched a path along plaster and wood. I tucked one camera above the pantry door, another near the hall light, one watching the side gate where the fence leans. I labeled each feed with a name I would recognize even half awake. By the time the noon sun pressed white against the blinds, the house had a new kind of backbone. In the bedroom, I paired each device to a small monitor and to my phone. A grid blinked a live entryway, kitchen, hallway, back porch, side yard. The feeds looked harmless, a family of aquariums with no fish yet. I scrolled to stored clips and found yesterday's timestamp when Isolde had stopped by. There she was, moving with the tidy purpose of someone who treats other people's homes like stores. She asked for water and drifted out of frame. 30 seconds later, her hand returned, rummaging in a drawer that wasn't near the glasses at all. Another clip showed the freezer door open, a glint of my spare key ring against a bag of peas. I paused the frame and let the proof cool my anger into something steadier. These weren't suspicions anymore. These were minutes and pixels and timestamps. A soft knock pulled me from the screen. On the porch stood Mrs. Keene from 2 doors down, carrying a pie in the pilgrim tin she uses every fall. Thought you might be short on appetite but long on needing sweetness, she said, voice low. We sat on the steps because the air was good and the live oaks threw wide shade. After a few breaths, she folded her hands. I saw your daughter here Tuesday, she murmured. You weren't home. She left by the side gate. I didn't interfere, wasn't my business, but it didn't sit right. I felt the small kindness of being witnessed. It is a particular relief when someone else names the thing you've been afraid to say out loud. If it ever comes to it, she added, I can tell what I saw. I thanked her and felt the sting of grateful tears I refused to let fall. We talked a while about ordinary things, trash pickup, the church bazaar, her roses losing battles with beetles, until the ordinary curved us back to the hard thing. My oldest did this after my Frank passed, she said. They called it love, but it was hunger. Keep your account small on your phone and big on paper, and write down everything. I told her I had started a log neat columns with dates and times, even the weather beside each line, because judges believe in details. She smiled the sad, sturdy smile women learn from weather. Good. Your calm is your proof. We arranged a simple signal 2 porch lights on in the daytime if I ever needed help without talking. Before she left, she touched my arm just once, a brief press that felt like a handrail at the top of a steep stair. Twilight fell like a shawl. I brewed tea and dimmed the lamps, then settled on the edge of the bed, with my phone propped against a book. The feeds purred green icons, steady. At 9:13, the side yard camera hiccuped. A shape slid past the hibiscus, pausing near the gate latch. The lens gathered what it could, a shoulder, a cheek's blur, the blank intent of someone trying not to be seen. My body went still in that old animal way, breath thin but obedient. I tapped to zoom. The figure tilted, tested the latch, then reconsidered. A long minute passed in silences I could feel. From the street, a car rolled by, and the figure shrank closer to the fence, then slipped away toward the alley. I saved the clip, marked it with the time, and sent a copy to my email before the courage could drain from my fingers. When the yard returned to ordinary darkness, I lay back and listened to the house. The refrigerator coughed. The AC sighed. Beyond the window, a nightbird complained about whatever nightbirds complain about. Fear tried to negotiate. Resolve answered for me. I checked the locks again by habit and set reminders for the clinic and for Elias. On the dresser, Harlan's cufflinks glinted like 2 careful moons. The monitor's glow washed the ceiling in a soft square, as if the room had its own quiet lamp of vigilance. I let my eyes rest there, steady as a level. I thought about how people reframe love into permission duty, into possession, and mothers into accounts receivable. Not this mother. Not anymore. I sent Mrs. Keene a quick thank you, left the porch lights plan in my notes, and placed my phone face up where I could see the tiny marching seconds. Near midnight, I replayed the clip and let the grainy outline of that shoulder teach me something simple. I had not imagined the danger. I had prepared for it. Tomorrow, I would label the footage, print stills, and tuck a copy into my red folder. I would also swing by the police substation to file an incident report, not because I expected a cruiser on the corner, but because paper plus pictures becomes a spine. And if dawn delivered fresh audacity to my doorstep, I would greet it with ink, with dates, and with the patient memory of these new eyes in my walls. Finally, sleep came. The monitor's green dot kept vigil for me. Dawn crept into my living room in streaks of pale gold when I noticed a sheet of paper shoved under my front door. At first, I thought it was another advertisement or a neighbor's note. But as I bent down and picked it up, my chest tightened. The header bore a law firm's name I didn't recognize. Across the page, my own name glared back at me, stamped above a signature that looked uncomfortably like mine. It was a power of attorney form granting Isolde and Gregory control over my finances. My hand trembled. I never signed such a thing. I sat at the kitchen table, the paper spread before me as though it were a venomous snake. The lines were neat, the language precise, the formatting identical to official forms I'd seen when Harlan and I once updated our estate plan. But the signature, crooked in a way my own hand never faltered, mocked me. Rage rose in my throat. My daughter's hunger had gone beyond words. It had slithered onto paper, seeking to erase me in ink. The betrayal pierced sharper than any insult she'd ever hurled. I read every line, forcing myself to focus through the blur of outrage. The document declared I was no longer capable of sound financial judgment. It named Isolde as primary agent, Gregory as secondary. They hadn't even hidden their intent behind softer words. It was all there, a map of my erasure. If this paper had been accepted without question, I would wake one morning to find my accounts drained and my choices stripped away. The thought sickened me, but it also sparked something steady. I would not let it stand. Holding the paper up to the light, I caught a detail that stopped me cold. The bottom right corner was torn jagged as if ripped hastily from another copy. The notary stamp was incomplete, missing its circular edge. I squinted closer, tracing the break with my finger. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with possibility. That torn edge was no accident. It was proof that the document was not authentic, a forgery clumsily disguised. They had tried to steal my life with a fake, and in their arrogance, they had left behind their fingerprints. I wasted no time. By late morning, I was seated across from Elias Corbin in his office, the forged form spread between us. His gray brows furrowed as he leaned forward, magnifying glass in hand. "This is fraudulent," he said firmly, tapping the missing stamp. "A judge will see it. And once this is introduced, it won't just be about guardianship, it will be about criminal intent." His words steadied me like a rope tossed to a drowning woman. I wasn't losing my mind. I was seeing clearly. My enemies were the ones resorting to shadows. Elias urged me to prepare for the hearing with more than just emotion. "Keep everything documented, Claudine. Dates, times, originals, copies. This isn't only family betrayal, it's a legal war." I knotted my fingers, gripping the edges of the page as if holding a shield. For the first time since Harlan's funeral, I felt the ground beneath me harden instead of crumble. That night, back in my study, I added the forged document to my evidence folder alongside photographs, bank statements, and my growing log of every attempt to break me. I slid the file shut and rested my palm on it. "They think I'll vanish with a piece of paper," I whispered into the quiet. "But they've already left enough trails to bury themselves." The words weren't anger. They were a vow. The date of the hearing, circled in red on my calendar, loomed larger than ever. Days away, it promised a battlefield not of fists or shouting matches, but of truth against deception. I turned off the lamp, leaving the folder locked in the drawer, and let the darkness settle around me, not as fear this time, but as armor. The morning air outside the Travis County Courthouse felt heavier than the Texas heat could explain. I climbed the steps slowly, my folder of documents pressed to my chest. Ahead of me, the crowd of cameras and reporters turned as if on cue. Flashes burst like lightning. Whispers threaded through the air, elder fraud guardianship case. Every word landed sharp as gravel against my skin. I hadn't even stepped inside, and already I felt stripped bare. I held my chin steady, but inside dread gnawed at me. Inside the courtroom, wood polished to a false shine reflected the light too brightly. The judge entered, and the session opened with a formality that couldn't soften the blow. When he began reading the petition, I braced myself. Words that should never have belonged to a daughter filled the air, confused, reckless, with money unsafe to manage her affairs. Each line pulled from the staged humiliations I had endured, the missing keys, the altered medication, the whispers. My stomach turned. They were using my own grief and silence as weapons. I clenched my hands under the table, the sting of shame making my breath shallow. Yet I sat tall, refusing to fold before the eyes that measured me. The bailiff called the first witness. Mrs. Keene stepped forward, small but steady in her pale blue dress. Her voice, calm and practiced from her years as a nurse, carried more weight than its softness suggested. She told the court she had seen Isolde at my home when I wasn't there, slipping through the side gate. Murmurs broke out. She paused, then added, "Claudine remembers better than most doctors I worked with." My throat tightened, not with grief this time, but with gratitude. In that moment, the cracks in their wall appeared. A piece of truth had finally spoken for me. Elias rose then, the projector flickering to life. On the screen, my kitchen appeared grainy but clear. The jurors leaned forward as the footage rolled, Isolde's hand sliding my keys into the freezer, her movements precise and deliberate. Gasps rippled through the room. Gregory's face drained of color. I didn't move, didn't blink. I let the silence work harder than any protest could. The footage had spoken louder than words ever could. My humiliation transformed into something harder, sharper vindication. When the judge called the session to close, his gavel struck with measured weight. He didn't give a ruling, but said, "This court has serious concerns about the credibility of the petitioners." The words hung in the air like a bell tolling. I gathered my papers without looking at Isolde or Gregory. Outside, the cameras flashed again, but this time their eyes didn't see a frail woman to pity. They saw someone who had endured the storm and was still standing. I walked down the courthouse steps in silence, the hum of reporters buzzing at my back. Silence, I realized, was sometimes the loudest weapon I had. By the time dusk settled over my street, the courthouse air still clung to me like dust. I set my purse on the entry table and found an envelope waiting no stamp, only my name in Isolde's looping script. Inside, her handwriting leaned sweet. She wrote of family peace of turning the page and a dinner where we could rebuild. Tucked behind the note lay 4 typed pages labeled Family Stability Trust. Blue ink underlined certain phrases. I stood in the doorway long enough for the porch light to blink on and the moths to circle it like small, foolish planets. Peace, I thought, is a word that often arrives already negotiated. I took the papers to my desk, turned on the lamp, and read the draft twice. The trust named my daughter and Gregory as co-trustees with emergency discretion to move consolidate or liquidate any account bearing my name. A health and safety clause let them intervene on mere belief. Another paragraph proposed that my home be transferred into the trust immediately to ensure continuity. I circled lines, wrote question marks, and underlined one sentence until the paper thinned. All decisions by co-trustees shall be final. The language smiled while it reached for my keys. I made tea and sat with Harlan's photograph. He'd trusted me to steer the rest of the way. He left a clause to protect me from pressure. Now pressure had changed its clothes. I pictured the courtroom projector flashing the footage of Isolde pocketing my keys, the way the room gasped, the way I didn't raise my voice. If a trap could be set with a smile, then a defense could be built with silence. In the morning, I called Selene Tran. We had spoken through Elias before, but this time I asked for her directly. "I received a trust proposal," I said. "It looks like a reconciliation. It reads like a takeover." Selene listened without interrupting the way people do when they have practiced hearing hard things. "If you agree to dinner," she said, "let's capture their intent. Texas permits one-party recording. We'll keep it discreet. I'll coordinate with Elias." We picked a code word that no one at the table would notice, but anyone from here would recognize Bluebonnet. I wrote it on a yellow sticky note and folded it shut. By late morning, I was at Elias's office with the draft in a neat stack. He skimmed, then slowed at the underlined lines. "They want control now with language that looks protective," he said. "We'll mark the unlawful portions and prepare a response. Meanwhile, if they articulate those same powers over dinner, that recording will speak more cleanly than any accusation." Selene arrived with a recorder the size of a lipstick, a lapel magnet, and a set of simple instructions. "Keep your questions open. Let them fill the air." I practiced at his conference table. "Walk me through what emergency discretion means," I said to the empty air. "Why would my house need to be moved into a trust before the first anniversary?" Elias nodded approval. Selene placed the device in my palm. It clicked once, a tiny heartbeat. If you sense them escalating, she added, "Say the word naturally. Bluebonnet. I'll be nearby." I left their office with the recorder in my purse and a copy of the draft annotated in red. The ink felt like a fence line. At home, I wrote my reply. I accepted dinner on my terms, public restaurant early evening, separate checks, no wine. I kept the note short and polite, leaving no room for interpretation. When I called to confirm, Isolde answered on the first ring with a brightness that didn't reach her breathing. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said. "This is the grown-up way." I let the compliment pass like a cloud. 7 o'clock, I said. "At the place near the river. We'll talk." A pause then. "Of course." I texted Celine the time and location, then phoned Mrs. Keene. She offered to sit at the bar with a book, her gray bob neat as a schoolgirl's promise. "I won't get in the way," she said, "but I'll be there." I laid out my jacket and a string of pearls Harlan bought me the year the live oaks iced over. I pinned the recorder's magnet behind the lapel where the fabric wouldn't ripple. In the mirror, I looked like a woman going to supper, not a woman carrying a wire. That suited me fine. Before bed, I walked the rooms like a captain checking lines. The house smelled of lemon oil and eucalyptus, small comforts that root the mind when the ground wants to tilt. I reviewed my questions, pictured myself stirring coffee, slowly letting the seconds do their work. Mercy could be performed. The truth could be too if you gave it enough quiet. When I turned off the lamp, the moon laid a pale strip across Harlan's photograph. "Stay with me," I whispered, not as a prayer, but as a habit of love. On the morning of the dinner, I woke with the steadiness that sometimes follows a long fear. I paid bills, watered the basil, and drove a short errand to keep my hands useful. Back home, I placed the trust draft into a thin folder and set it beside my purse. I said the code word once, tasting the syllables, bluebonnet, a flower hardy enough to bloom out of stone. I would walk into a room that pretended to be a garden and see whether the soil was real. I sealed my RSVP and laid the recorder beside my purse, whispering our code to the empty room bluebonnet. The restaurant's lights were warm and low-polished wood, gleaming under amber shades. I paused at the entrance, steadying my breath as the hostess guided me toward the table. Isolde and Gregory were already there, their smiles practiced porcelain perfect. I adjusted my purse at my side, the tiny recorder tucked deep inside its silent readiness, heavier than any jewel. Mom, Isolde said, rising slightly, brushing my shoulder with a kiss that felt as thin as paper. "We're so glad you came." I nodded, offering no warmth, only civility. The evening wasn't about food, it was theater. Appetizers arrived, small plates dressed in bright sauces. Isolde folded her hands as if in prayer. "I've been thinking," she began, softly, eyes glistening, "about healing, about family unity. We've all been hurt, and I don't want us to stay fractured." She slid a packet across the table, the same draft she had mailed. This family stability trust could put us all back on even ground. Everyone can feel safe, safe. I thought if safety meant chains. I didn't touch the papers. Instead, I asked evenly, what exactly would this trust require of me? Her lashes lowered, a practiced gesture. Only signatures, mother. Nothing burdensome. Gregory and I would handle the details. You could rest. Rest. The words sounded like burial. I sipped water, the recorder listening while I held my silence. Gregory leaned in his tone, breaking the soft facade. "With everything consolidated, we can finally expand investments, secure it all before it's wasted." The word landed sharp, heavier than the clink of glasses as he raised his iced tea in mock celebration. I did not lift mine. His voice grew eager, careless. "The markets are hot now. Sitting on assets is dead weight. We could move quickly before anyone questions competence again." I felt my stomach twist, but not from fear. His slip was more telling than any forged paper. The recorder captured every syllable, every rush of greed in his tone. I leaned back, placing my hands on the cool table edge, and what I asked softly, if I refuse again. The question froze Isolde mid-smile. Gregory snapped before she could answer. "Then the court will take care of it." The words fell like iron, echoing louder than any outburst. I met their eyes first, hers, then his, and let silence hold. Silence could wound more deeply than protest. No anger, no pleading, only a calm they couldn't rattle. When the plates were cleared, I rose, thanking them with the same practiced politeness they had offered me. Gregory extended his hand, stiff. I shook it briefly. Isolde pressed my arm, her grip harder than her words. Outside, the night air wrapped around me, cooler than the false warmth inside. I walked to my car, slowly, each step deliberate. In my purse, the recorder rested like a sealed verdict. Their own voices would speak louder than mine ever could. The morning after the dinner, I sat in Elias Corbin's office with the recording still fresh in my ears. The little device had caught every word, every sharp edge hidden beneath their smiles. Elias had it already backed up in 3 places, an encrypted drive, a secure cloud, and one more copy he locked inside his safe. As he scrolled through the timestamps, he murmured, "This isn't defense anymore, Claudine. This is documentation for prosecution." Hearing that, I felt the ache of exhaustion in my bones, but also the steadiness of a woman who had carried grief and betrayal and still stood. We played the part where Gregory's voice slipped, talking about consolidating assets before they're wasted. Then the softer tone of Isolde urging unity while sliding documents meant to erase me. I let the silence of the office hold me. My hands were folded tight in my lap, but my jaw no longer trembled. It was as if I had been waiting years to hear the truth spoken so plainly by someone other than me. Later that morning, Elias brought Celine onto a conference call patching in, a voice from the Austin Police Department's Elder Abuse Unit. The investigator's tone was brisk, practiced. They had seen too many of these cases, they said. Too many children who thought inheritance was better taken warm than cold. They listened as Elias laid out the pattern false prescriptions, forged signatures, a petition for guardianship, and now recorded manipulation. The investigator agreed a sting was warranted. I sat quietly, the receiver warm against my ear, listening to the logistics of what would come next. It was surreal to hear strangers discuss my life like a case file. But I clung to the fact that their voices carried something mine had been denied in recent weeks' belief. When the call ended, Selene told me gently, "This is the pivot point, Mrs. Vega. You're not alone anymore." By early afternoon, my home was no longer just a home. Technicians moved with quiet precision, syncing my hidden cameras to a live feed that streamed to an unmarked van parked down the street. They mounted an audio transmitter inside the dining room light fixture, testing it until Selene's voice crackled back through a handheld receiver, loud and clear. The code word was finalized. "Blue Bonnet," I repeated, steadying my voice. The word felt fitting, rooted in Texas soil, ordinary enough to pass unnoticed, yet strong enough to trigger an emergency response. They told me paramedics would be stationed within a block, their van engine idling in case the evening turned darker than planned. As the technicians worked, I walked the perimeter of my house, touching the corners of each room like I was blessing them. I thought of Harland, how he used to check every lock before bed, how he believed safety was a habit, not an accident. For the first time since his passing, I felt him beside me, approving of the cautious rituals I was now forced to practice. It was just after 4 when the phone rang. Isolde's voice slid through sweet as syrup. "Let me bring dinner, Mom. Like old times. I'll cook." She paused as though waiting for my relief. Instead, I simply said, "Early meal. No alcohol. That's fine." She hesitated only a breath before agreeing. When I hung up, I texted Celine the time and place. Within minutes, a plan was moving, rehearsed, and measured down to where I would place my phone on the dining table. The house was quiet at dusk, but my nerves were not. I laid out simple plates, poured water into glasses, and set my phone face down at the center. In the shadows, the transmitter blinked. I rehearsed the word Blue Bonnet under my breath, a charm against panic. Outside, I imagined the quiet hum of engines, the steady eyes watching on screens, the safety net I had fought so hard to earn. As the last light faded from the windows, a knock landed at my door. My heart clenched, not with fear, but with readiness. Every wire, every word, every decision had led to this moment. The casserole sat steaming in front of me, its scent richer than I remembered from my daughter's cooking. The table was set perfectly cloth-smoothed silverware, lined candles glowing low. But I could see the tremor in her hands as she placed the dish down, and I felt the weight of what lingered behind her eyes. "Go ahead," Mom Isolde urged with a smile too wide, too polished. Gregory leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed like a man already certain of victory. I stirred the food with my fork, buying time. My stomach tightened, though not from hunger. I had waited decades for dinners filled with warmth, laughter, family, and now I sat here with a plate that might carry a purpose darker than any hunger I had ever known. Gregory chuckled. It won't be long now. Soon she won't have to worry about decisions anymore. My heart beat steady, not frantic. I let their words hover over the table like smoke. I did not flinch, not even when the ache of betrayal pressed like a stone inside me. I had learned by now silence could be my sharpest blade. I set my fork down, gently lifting my water glass. The words came as naturally as if I were remarking on the weather. These blue bonnets outside are early this year. The glass touched my lips, my voice calm, steady. To anyone else, it was nothing. But to the ears waiting in the van down the block, it was thunder. The signal was sent. A pause stretched. Gregory's jaw tensed. Isolde's smile faltered just for a second, but enough. I let the silence coil around us, thick and charged. Then came the sound of firm knock, a door swinging open, boots on my floor. "Mrs. Vega," an officer said firmly, "please remain seated." 2 more officers stepped in their presence, filling the room with authority. Gregory shot up his chair, scraping back hard, but a hand landed on his shoulder before he could move further. "This is a misunderstanding." Isolde shrieked, her eyes darting from me to the casserole to the recorder, now resting on the table. Her voice cracked under the weight of panic. "No, Isolde," I said softly, rising to my feet, steady as stone. "This is clarity." Cellini followed the officers, calm and businesslike, gathering the plate, sealing it in a bag, marking it with evidence tape. The recorder from my purse was placed alongside its blinking light, proof enough of the words that had already damned them. Gregory slammed his palm against the table. "You can't do this. We're family." I met his glare with a gaze that did not waver. Family does not plot to erase me. For the first time, I felt no trembling inside me. My voice carried across the room, sharper than handcuffs, stronger than any document. "You wanted me silent, gone, forgotten, but I am still here. And this life I built stone by stone, day by day, you cannot take it. Not with paper, not with poison, not with lies." The words fell heavy, truer than anything I had spoken in years. The click of cuffs followed one pair, then another. The officers guided my daughter and son-in-law toward the door. Isolde's protests blurred into the air. Gregory's curses dulled against the night. I stood there rooted, not broken, but whole. When the door closed behind them, silence returned. It was not empty, it was mine. The next morning, sunlight spilled across Elias's office. Papers stacked neatly, protective orders signed, assets locked under my name. The legal tide had shifted, not because I fought louder, but because I endured smarter. Elias looked at me with quiet respect. "You did what many cannot. You faced your own blood and didn't break." I placed my hand on the folder, the one holding every log, every photo, every page of truth. For the first time since Harlan's passing, I felt not only his absence, but also his blessing. I whispered more to myself than anyone else I did not lose a daughter last night. I found myself. Outside, the Texas sun blazed high. The streets bustled with ordinary life, people buying coffee buses, rolling by, laughter drifting through open windows. For me, it was more than another morning. It was freedom reclaimed. As I stepped into the light, I knew my husband's legacy was safe, not because of courts or papers, but because I had finally claimed my own voice. Looking back on everything I endured, I've come to see that dignity is not something anyone can give or take. It's something we must hold for ourselves, even when it's tested by those closest to us. Family should be built on love, not control, and respect is worth more than money. If my story teaches anything, it's that silence can be strength, and preparation can be protection. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand firm, even against family? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, type 1 below, or tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next story.